All right.
Okay, so we're finishing up, I hope, with the Mishnah 6 in our numbering, my numbering, chapter 2 in Pirkei Avot, and this is a continuation of Hillel's statements. We talked a little bit about learning and asking questions and teaching, and now we have two statements. One statement in the way I have it printed in my edition. There are the statements that we've had already, that if you're a boor, you're not going to be really reverential, and careful about sinning. If you're an ignoramus, you won't really be able to be pious. You may desire to be pious, but you really won't understand the ins and outs. Then we said a person who is shy or deferential in some way is not going to be able to learn. They won't ask questions. And then the teacher, if the teacher is too rough, they're not going to be able to teach. Then the next phrase is what we're up to. And I have a semicolon after that phrase, which sort of indicates that the editor here thought that this next phrase is somehow connected. And you'll see in a second why we might think that. And then the last phrase, which is quite a well-known phrase, sort of is a standalone. So that's by way of introduction, that's what we're up to. So now we're
Rabbi,
up to.
May I ask you, is it in the which book
Yes.
is it?
Yes,
It's in this book.
It's in that Sim Shalom also. Yes,
What page?
Sim Shalom. It's in the 200 and somethings, like 230, maybe 235. I'm going to find out for you in a second. Sorry, 270s. I was way off. 260s. 261. That's what we're up to. Page 261, Mishnah 6
This is in the same shalom that we use.
on Shabbat.
Okay, I'm gonna get that. All right.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay. So we're up to velo kol hamarbe b'schora machkim.
You want me to get it next?
I got
So does somebody want to read for us our mostly acceptable translations that people have a little variations on, but they're pretty much the same thing? Geraldine, go ahead.
Not everyone engrossed in business learns wisdom. And
Okay.
I also have a semicolon there.
Right, and you have one there too, okay.
Where there,
Any variations that pretty much preserve the same sense?
Yeah, I have,
Rita.
yeah, it says, nor is everyone who excels in business wise.
Okay, yes, wait, Josie.
I don't see that on here, on that page.
It's on page 261. It's the second paragraph, which is the second Mishnah. This was a favorite teaching of his,
I got it, okay.
okay? And what your translation says is not everyone engrossed in business learns wisdom.
Mhm.
That's your translation, Helen.
Right, got it.
And in Sim Shalom. And I have, he that engages over much in trade cannot be wise. The Hebrew, literally, the way it's structured is not everyone who does such and such does such and such, right? So not everyone, and then the words are Amar Bebischora, which means engages a lot in business, is very, very active in business. Not everyone who does that, machkim, becomes wise. Okay, that would be a literal translation. Okay, and now Bill and Josie have our other favorite counter translation.
This is more direct. It says a scholar cannot be preoccupied with business.
Okay, so he turns it around, right? He says, a scholar can't be preoccupied with business. What Hillel literally says is, if you're preoccupied with business, you're not going to become wise, right? You're not going to become a scholar or wise, from the word chacham. Okay, so that's why people think that this is related to everything before, because everything that we've had all these other phrases, sayings have been about the importance of learning, that you have to, all of the good qualities that you may be seeking, you need to actually back them up or ground them with learning, and how to maximize the potential for you to learn, how to maximize the potential for the teacher to teach. That's the concern that all of these statements have been, preoccupied with. And anybody want to talk now about business? Yes,
Is
Rita,
that
and then
why
Jen.
In
So-
Eastern,
Wait, okay, so Sarita, Jen, Josie.
So I thought this seems interesting in that it seems to be sort of questioning what the basis is sort of for success, right? So that don't look to the businessman, the business person as that, that's the wisest person, because that person isn't necessarily learned.
Okay, Jen.
I feel like it's a pretty broad statement. I mean, I agree with Sarita. That's what's going on. I also agree with that other translation. It does work both ways. We all have plenty of examples to draw of, business people who are obviously not wise in pop culture and all, like the Enron stories and all of that. So there's no shortage of that. But on a more personal level, I'm sure we have known people who can balance business with other learning and and being a decent person, and also being like a really holy and studious person. I think does not exactly excuse you from looking after your basic interests. I have a girlfriend who's like very, she's kind of pious and she's like Episcopalian or Anglican or whatever, and doesn't pay attention to stuff and has
What do
made
you
some
mean,
of the
or whatever? Come on.
Episcopalian and Anglican are the same communion, so I'm gonna excuse myself for that.
All
But
right.
like she made such a stupid deal, like because she just didn't do some basic research she could have done on her phone. What is shorting? Like, and lost a ton of money for having somebody do shorting investing for her because she had no idea what it was, and she excuses herself from learning anything about that, even a simple Google search, because she's busy being other things, being scholarly, and etc. So I think like it is kind of fair to turn it around too in that one translation. You're not really excused from looking after stuff because you're busy being holy. So I don't know, just for what it's worth.
So Josie and then John.
I know in the very Orthodox communities, the women work and the men study. Is that part of this same thing, that you can't take your time and energy for business if you really want to learn?
To a certain extent, it's not clear all across the board. Certain groups have a little more representation of the men in doing business. Satmar, for instance, which is of course a very, very, very right-wing ultra-Orthodox group, going to be in, remember the old B&H photo? That was all men, doing business. So doing business wasn't necessarily no good. The operative word here before we get to John is marbeh, to do a lot of it, right? So yes, the balancing is the question, what Jen was saying before, how much is just enough, how much is too much? That's part of the question. Yeah, John.
I think the too much aspect also has an element of being successful in it. And I think that that's a real trap, and certainly in our society, but in all of human history, that we mistake success for wisdom, as if someone's got some kind of secret and they must be super smart and they must be wise because they're making money, when it could be luck, it could be privilege, it could be advantage, it could be lots of things.
Or it could be ruthlessness.
Yeah, but even
Oh, good, yes.
it even gets into the arts, like any artist, knows there's a lot of envy when someone is making a big success and you're not, or they get the show and you don't get the show. Why didn't I get the show? And there's a real tendency to think, well, they must be doing something I'm not doing. They must be smarter than me, and ascribe it all to wisdom somehow, some kind of wisdom. So it's a big mistake.
Nick.
I think it's also a warning about seeing things from a limited perspective. you know, it could just as easily apply to the educated. To be educated doesn't mean that you're wise. To be knowledgeable doesn't mean that you're wise. It's the filter through which you absorb and reflect the material that makes for wisdom, not a particular criteria of education or status or business or whatever.
Right. So I think though that Hillel would definitely say, you know what, you got better chances of becoming wise if you actually try to immerse yourself in our sacred teachings.
Yeah.
Because
I would agree with that. I'm thinking of my brother. My brother is
mentioning no names.
My brother is a college professor who measures everything by intelligence, but intelligence is not a criteria for wisdom.
Right.
And so,
Right.
Maybe it's,
Yeah, Helen, go ahead.
I think you have to count it. You have to look at it.
So this is that back and forth we talked all about the beginning, about the ignorant person who wants to be pious. And Hillel says, no, you know what, with all of your good intentions, if you truly want to be pious, you're not going to know the full dimensions in a particular situation or in your life in general, unless you actually immerse yourself in the collective wisdom of the generations that have been developed and particularly focused on the questions that you're interested in. If you're interested in being pious, then don't disregard the fact that there have been generations and generations of people who have tried to think about how to be pious. So that's a warning. I want to go back just to reiterate some of the things that people have said. It is definitely about schora. It's definitely about doing the commercial activity that he's talking that he's working on. And I think, yes, we do have a quite a strong stream out there of people who feel that successful business people know what's going on, right? And there's even a kind of like the nerds and the people that are not really, they don't have the street smarts. They don't have they just don't know how to get along with people. They don't know how to really make their way in life. And there's a kind of a real, among some people, there's a real sense of, the business people know life. They really know what's what. And what Hillel is warning is that it ain't necessarily so. I'm going to interject an editorial comment. We have these struggles. We've had it this whole past year, other times too, but this past year has sort of like accentuated issues and questions that have always been questions and issues in our shul. Where I've been told, Rabbi, with all due respect, the shul is a business.
Yeah.
So, and that's, said as here it is, this is a piece of wisdom that you just don't get. Yeah, John. Now you're on mute.
I think along with the success thing, the thing to remember about business by definition is self-interested. It has to be. You're trying to make a profit. You're trying to win. When someone says, "Should I buy your product?" If it's not exactly right for them, you're not going to say, it'd be better buying somebody else's product. No, you're going to find whatever crack you can to say, this is the best product for you. So over and over again, our tradition always says, what about the person who's on the losing end of something, right? Instead of the winning end of something. So I think that, there's nothing wrong with being in business, but you just have to understand that one of the job dangers, it's going to cloud your perception about winners and losers and who needs help and who doesn't need help. That's, in my opinion, that's the problem with some politics that are all based on trickle down business, is that it's not, right. It doesn't take into account people who aren't lucky to win.
Right. I just want to, again, before we get to the other people, our tradition, it has a long history of cooperation. between the people who are studying Torah and people who are doing business, and including incorporating that in the same person. There have been many, many great Torah scholars who've also been business people. There was one of the greatest students of the Vilna Gaon. So many of you have heard of the Vilna Gaon. He was the greatest Talmudic scholar, and he was a mystic too, in the 18th century, 1700s, big opponent of Hasidism. But he was recognized as the greatest of the greatest. One of his greatest students basically spent most of his life running around doing business, and then he created a kind of one of the classic modern versions of the Shulchan Aruch, the Chaye Adam. So it's doable. On the other hand, you had, for instance, Maimonides depended on his brother. His brother was the businessman, and his brother supported Maimonides, who was able, as a result, to devote his considerable genius to developing into the greatest rabbi that ever lived. And he writes with a tremendous amount of pathos. His brother was a merchant, so he was traveling on the seas all the time. He was traveling in boats, and he died in a shipwreck. And Maimonides was devastated, not just because he lost his brother, but also because his whole life was turned upside down. So who wanted to speak? Josie wanted to speak. Who else? Audrey. Yeah. So Josie, then Audrey.
What did Hillel, who supported Hillel? What did he do?
So Hillel, that's a good question. Hillel started out dirt poor, and eventually he became a major, communal leader. And it's not clear how he was able to sustain himself. Was he supported by the community? Was he hired as he was sort of the proto-patriarch, right, of his time. But when he first started out, he came from Babylonia to the land of Israel to study Torah. And at that time, you had to pay to get into the study hall, and he couldn't afford it. And he used to climb up to the roof of the study hall, and he would listen in at the skylight because he wanted to hear what was being taught, but he couldn't afford to get in. And then one day, people noticed that in the middle of the day, it got really, really dark. And they looked, and they said, it's the middle of the day. Why is it so dark? And then they saw that there was a body lying on the skylight, and it had snowed, and he had sort of frozen and fainted, and he collapsed on the skylight. So he was blocking out. So they had to climb up to the roof, and they had to revive him and warm him up and save his life. But that was the kind of dedication that he had. He started out very, very poor. Audrey.
Well, I have two things, but the thing I wanted to say is, I've been attracted to, I am interested in, or I appreciate the Orthodox and the way that they are so committed to practicing and to observing. But the one thing that always stops me is this is right here, which is that I don't see any or enough personal transformation within the group of people that are practicing that way. So Hillel is suggesting that you would be developed in a certain way by studying. And
right, it's interesting. He says this is one of the places where, again, it's not such like it's always a negative, right? The boor won't be able to be reverential. It doesn't say that if you're not a boor, you will be reverential, right? He says the ignorant person cannot become pious. He doesn't say if you're not ignorant that you will be pious. He doesn't say that if you're not shy, you will learn everything. He just says if you are shy, you won't. He doesn't say that if you're a patient teacher, you'll be a great teacher. He just says if you're impatient, you can't. So the same thing now, he says, if you're just going to be running around looking for the next business deal, you're not going to become wise. What he doesn't say is, and if you don't, you will be wise.
I see. Okay,
right?
that's fair.
But your point is a very tough point. It's a very sensitive point. We had a big discussion about this in Zohar last week. And Jen, you had a good line. You want to say that line about what religion does?
Okay, it's noisy. I'm out on my porch. I'm sorry. One thing I've never been able to dispute with people about religion is I think it does indeed make good people better and bad people worse.
Wow.
So
That's well said.
an interesting perspective. Other people have said, if you think this person is a miserable SOB now, can you imagine how bad he would be if he didn't also practice the Torah? There's this kind of hope or fantasy that it improves you a little bit. At least you're not as bad as you would have been without it. But I share your concern. I share your concern, and part of the problem is, one of the reasons this is written is because Hillel knew that a lot of people don't take this seriously. Yeah, Jen, you wanted to say one more thing?
I say it can make you slightly better if you don't take certain prejudices that are in the Torah or any other scripture in the entire world and run rampant with them. That's the way in which it can make you much worse than you otherwise would have been if you weren't immersed in scripture.
Right. I think that one of the, John, I'll see your chance in a second. I also want to say that in the old days, when groups were more isolated from each other, when the interactions between groups were much more transactional, right? You don't kill me, I won't rebel against you. You let me buy your supplies, I'll let you buy these things. In the old days, groups used to be more in their own little bubble. Now, one of the great challenges is how do you maintain your group identity in an open society? But when we were more in bubbles, it was easier just in terms of human nature to be nice to each other because there was a bottom line belief that we were all the same. Once we start getting, put off by the fact that somebody else doesn't look like us, doesn't believe like us, doesn't behave like us, that other, right? Treating the other decently, let alone with love and consideration, that's very hard. So in the old days, when you lived in your own ghetto, there was a kind of a baseline assumption that, hey, we're all the same, and therefore you could lend a cup of sugar, you could be nice to each other in different ways. Although, of course, if you've listened to any of the kosher salt stories, there's plenty of stuff going on in within the Jewish community. Shalom Aleichem is quite upfront about the shortcomings of within the internal Jewish community, how people were nice or weren't nice to each other. Anyway, John.
I just wanted to riff on what Jennifer said about religion makes bad people worse. I think that's any dogma. That's how I look at it. Religion is just another one of those. It could be people. Anytime anybody believes wholeheartedly in something is the answer to everything. To me, that's when it starts going south. Politics, business, art, anything.
What about God?
Huh?
What about God?
Well, religion, yeah. I mean, I think if you think your religion
is
God
the same thing as religion?
No, but the idea that your religion is the one true thing and that encapsulates all the truth, capital T, that always, like fascism or any other ism, it always leads to problems.
So I'm not going to say who it says that who said this to me, but they said I'm all in favor of religion. It's religions that I can't stand. So which comes back to your point. Yeah, Sarita.
So just in that vein, we actually listened in from the road last week. And when the whole discussion about the diffident not being able to learn, it really did strike me, and it's striking me today as well, that we're exploring here sort of the Jewish values and the Jewish belief system. And I think it's important for us to recognize that that is what we're exploring, and not necessarily universal truths or what everyone should believe. So, that really struck me when we were talking about sort of when I was listening to people talking about what it takes to learn, because in many cultures, it would not be acceptable for someone who is to question another person in authority. There are also cultures in which you are expected to learn by observing and listening, and not to do something until you have absorbed all the information well enough to do so that you can do it well. And so it just really struck me, and it's striking me today, for us to keep that as a perspective about, that what we're talking about is really exploring our own religious belief system, as opposed to this has to apply to everyone and everyone has to agree on the same set of values.
So I would counter that. Certainly Hillel believed that his belief system was universally valid. But on the other hand, I think that your examples apply within the Jewish tradition. The Jewish tradition has plenty of stories of people that had to be, that show a little respect, be quiet until you finally find something out. Even you can be differential even in your silence. Do you actually quietly follow the person, or do you say, well, it's not for me. Who am I to actually be around when it's not, I haven't earned it yet. So there are all kinds of times and places where the counter feature of any of these statements is celebrated and promoted in the Jewish tradition. So I don't think it's about this is the Jewish take, and the Jewish take doesn't know about deference, being not asking questions. Gershom Shalom has a famous in his book, his classic book. I think it's the classic book, and he has a lot of books. He talks about when he wanted to first start studying mysticism. He went to one of the mystical rabbis, and in Jerusalem, and the rabbi said, "Okay, you can come and study with me on one condition: don't ask a single question.
Don't what? Don't
ask any questions."
Uh-huh.
Right. So, and that rabbi, believe me, he knew this backwards and forwards. But yes, there's a time and a place. There's a context, and it's very situational. It depends on where and what and how. But had Gershom Shalom been such a shy person that he didn't go to that rabbi to ask to study, he wouldn't have learned anything. So the shyness applies in different kinds of ways also. So you can have audacious silence, and not be questioning. Okay, we don't have, we got to stop now. I'm sorry. We'll go to the last statement, I hope. Next time, I want to wish everyone a good Yontif. Wait, there are two things in the chat. Did I miss anything? No. Okay.
Yontif. Stay
Good
safe.
Yontif to everybody.
Good Yontif. Yesh Koach.